Michael Jones was no ordinary CEO. He had a mission to understand the true nature of his company. Disguised as David Carter, an unnoticed intern, Michael ventured into the depths of his organization, only to uncover a dark underbelly of favoritism, nepotism, and a toxic culture. His days were filled with disdain, disrespect, and tedious tasks as he silently gathered evidence, but every humiliation brought him closer to exposing the corruption festering within Jones Tech Innovations. Michael endured the pain, not for himself, but for the employees who suffered from this rigged system. In the end, his disguise and resilience would help him restore justice, making his company a beacon of fairness. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Before we dive into this story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The early morning sky still held the faint glow of a warm orange as Michael Jones carefully parked his car a few streets away from his massive corporate office, which loomed over the heart of downtown New York City. It was bitterly cold, the kind of morning where the icy wind slices through every layer, no matter how thick. Clad in a shabby coat, faded jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days, Michael caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window of a nearby coffee shop. For a moment, he hardly recognized the man staring back. Gone were the polished suits, and the sleek shoes replaced by a modest disguise that felt foreign to the CEO he usually was. Today, he wasn't Michael Jones, the confident leader of Jones Tech Innovations. He was David Carter, an ordinary guy searching for a stable foothold in the world. David Carter was everything Michael was not. Where Michael exuded authority and filled every room with his commanding presence, David was quiet, unsure, a recent graduate just trying to find his place. No one would ever suspect that this unassuming, quiet intern was the mastermind behind one of the nation's most powerful tech companies. But that was precisely the point. Michael wasn't stepping into his world today, he was stepping into theirs. Entering through the side door used by lower-level staff, a route he had never taken before, Michael felt the cold reality of what it meant to be faceless in a world that usually bowed at the mention of his name. Today, no special treatment and no VIP welcome. Today, he would walk in the shoes of his employees, seeing their challenges and experiences firsthand. As he moved through the lobby, he passed by the same security guard who always greeted him warmly. But today, there was no smile, no recognition. He wasn't Michael Jones, the CEO, anymore. He was invisible, just David. The elevator ride felt long as people cast brief, dismissive glances in his direction. He didn't fit in with the rest, his scruffy appearance out of place among the polished professionals, making him feel like an outsider. The door slid open on the 16th floor where David Carter, the intern, was expected. The receptionist barely acknowledged his existence, her eyes glued to the computer as she sighed with disinterest. Name, she asked, her voice devoid of any warmth. David Carter, he responded quietly, trying his best to blend into this new identity. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Without even looking up or offering a smile, she handed him a temporary badge, her indifference palpable. Wait over there, she mumbled, gesturing to the waiting area. Someone will come for you. Michael sat down, the weight of his disguise settling over him like the cold outside. At that moment, he realized just how different the world looked from this perspective without the power of his name, without the respect he had earned as CEO. He was just another face in the crowd, waiting to be seen. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Michael sat on a hard, uncomfortable chair, waiting for anything to happen. His eyes scanned the room, observing the steady flow of employees rushing past him, their conversations and laughter filling the air, though not a single person acknowledged him. It was as if he were invisible, just another unnoticed face in the sea of workers. Some employees exchanged friendly greetings and even shared a laugh, while others were passed by without so much as a nod. A clear divide existed, and as Michael took it all in, the rumors about the company's fractured culture began to make sense to him. There was an unspoken hierarchy at play, one he hadn't fully understood until now. After what felt like an eternity, the door finally opened, revealing a large, gruff man with a face set in a permanent frown. His posture was stiff, his expression devoid of warmth. "You Carter?" the man asked flatly, not even attempting to mask his indifference. "Yeah, that's me," Michael responded, rising to his feet. "Come on, follow me." The man, who hadn't bothered to introduce himself, turned and led Michael down a long, dimly lit corridor that seemed to stretch forever. The walls were bare, and the sound of their footsteps echoed in the silence. At the very end of the hallway, tucked away from the bustling floor, was a small, cramped room. It felt forgotten, as if it existed outside the company's usual rhythm. "This is your space," the man said, pointing toward a tiny desk wedged into a corner, far removed from the sunlight streaming through the windows or the lively chatter of the office. Michael looked at the man, still hoping to establish some connection, some common ground. "What's your name?" he asked. "Oscar," the man replied curtly, his tone clipped and cold. "I'll be supervising you. I've got some tasks for you to get started on." With that, he handed Michael a thick stack of worn documents. "I need you to organize these files and scan them all into PDFs. Have it done by the end of the day." Michael glanced at the dusty papers and then took in his surroundings. The room felt like it hadn't been touched in years. Old filing cabinets lined the walls, and stacked boxes filled every available corner. The outdated computer on the desk hummed weakly, as though it might give up at any moment. It was a relic of a different era, completely disconnected from the sleek, modern technology of his own office. Michael knew what this was. He had been placed here to be ignored, given tasks designed to keep him out of sight. He set to work, meticulously organizing contracts and invoices, most of which had long since lost their relevance. The mundane nature of the task wore on him, and as his fingers flipped through the papers, he couldn't help but wonder how the new his interns were being treated. The sharp contrast between his current situation and the life he had known as CEO gnawed at him. By lunchtime, he couldn't stand the isolation any longer. He decided to stretch his legs, walking around the floor to get a better sense of the daily routine his employees experienced. As he passed by the cafeteria, his attention was drawn to a group of young interns sitting together at a table, chatting energetically. Laughter filled the air as they discussed their latest project, their shiny new laptops open in front of them. They looked engaged, inspired, and full of ambition. A pang of envy hit Michael unexpectedly. Just earlier that morning, he had noticed how those same interns had been warmly greeted at the reception, guided through their first day with care and attention. Now, here they were, involved in the kind of exciting, meaningful work he had once prided himself on offering. Determined to blend in and understand more, Michael approached them, eager to strike up a conversation. "Hey, how's everything going? What kind of project are you working on?" One of the interns looked up, his expression indifferent, perhaps even a little condescending. "Oh, you're the new guy, right, David?" "Yeah," Michael responded, forcing a friendly smile, though the coldness in their reaction stung a bit more than he'd anticipated. The moment Michael heard the condescending words, "What we're doing is confidential," followed by a snide, "Go back to your little corner and keep organizing those papers," a wave of humiliation washed over him. The chuckles that trailed his retreat hit him like daggers, each one amplifying the sense of alienation. He had built this company, yet here he was, utterly invisible. With a heavy heart, he trudged back to the isolated room that felt more like a forgotten closet than a workspace. Oscar was waiting, his face twisted in impatience. "You think this is a place to waste time?" Oscar barked, glaring at Michael. "We don't have room for slackers, Carter." Swallowing the urge to defend himself, Michael returned to his menial task in silence. The weight of anonymity pressed down on him. This was what it felt like to be just another cog in the machine, stripped of identity and influence. It was a reality he had never truly understood until now. The hours crept by at a glacial pace as Michael completed the monotonous document scanning. He handed the files to Oscar, hoping for some acknowledgement, maybe a small nod of approval. Instead, Oscar's eyes narrowed. "This should have been done quicker," he said sharply. "Tomorrow, I expect you here earlier." As the days wore on, Michael's sense of isolation deepened. He was met with the same cold treatment from Oscar and the other managers. Their disdain hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating any sense of progress. Each task he completed was met with criticism, and each effort to connect with his colleagues was shut down with indifference or mockery. One afternoon, after finishing the task earlier than expected, Michael thought perhaps he could change their perception of him. Maybe if he showed some initiative and asked for more responsibilities, they would see him differently. He tracked down Oscar, who was in a meeting room with two other managers. When he knocked and entered, the room seemed to grow colder, the stares even icier. "What do you want?" Carter. Oscar's irritation was unmistakable. "I've finished the work you gave me," Michael said, trying to keep his voice humble. "I wanted to know if there's anything else I can do." The managers exchanged cynical glances, their expressions filled with amusement. The woman with short hair and a severe demeanor was the first to speak. "David," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We wouldn't want you to overexert yourself. Just stick to whatever Oscar gives you, all right?" Michael felt a knot of frustration tighten in his chest, but he forced a smile. "Understood. I just wanted to help more." Oscar chuckled, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Help? If you're so eager to help, why don't you grab coffee for the team? That'll be useful." Michael's stomach churned with humiliation, but he nodded, masking his frustration. "Sure," he muttered. "I'll be right back." As he walked away, the weight of the moment settled over him like a dark cloud. The mighty CEO, the man who had once commanded respect and authority, had now been reduced to a mere errand boy. It wasn't just the tasks that wore him down, it was the complete erosion of his identity. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had come to understand his employees' struggles, but at the cost of his pride. Every step he took to fetch their coffee was a step deeper into the harsh reality of life without the privileges his name had once afforded him. As Michael walked toward the cafeteria, the weight of his situation pressed down on him. The irony was almost too much to bear. He had once stood at the top of the company he built from the ground up, and now he was reduced to fetching coffee, forced to play the role of a faceless intern just to see what his employees went through. When he returned, balancing the cups in his hands, the managers didn't even bother to hide their disdain. One of them smirked and muttered under his breath, loud enough for Michael to hear. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. "Finally, something you can get right," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The comment stung, but Michael didn't react. Weeks passed, each day blending into the next, a cycle of demeaning tasks and dismissive attitudes. The daily routine of being disrespected, underestimated, and utterly ignored was wearing him down. He would often overhear the managers gossiping, their conversations filled with backhanded remarks about employees they deemed unfit for success. One day in the break room, Michael listened as 2 managers discussed the promotion of a director's son. "Can you believe it? The kid got promoted, and he doesn't even know what he's doing," one manager said, chuckling. "But hey, when you've got the right connections, who cares?" The other manager laughed in agreement. "It's all about who you know, not what you know." Michael felt a sickening realization creep over him. The culture of his company wasn't just flawed, it was broken. It wasn't just subtle racial discrimination at play, but a pervasive system of nepotism and favoritism that rewarded the well-connected over the deserving. Merit had no place here if you weren't part of the in crowd. It became painfully clear to him that the injustice in his company was much deeper than he had imagined. If he wanted to dismantle this toxic environment, he would need to gather undeniable proof. But with each passing day, the injustice and frustration gnawed at him, and the humiliation he endured was fueling a fire within him, a fire for change. One particularly grueling afternoon, Michael sat at his desk, his body aching from the endless hours of mundane tasks. He was physically drained, but the emotional toll was even greater. Just as he thought he might be able to call it a day, Oscar walked in, his face set in that all too familiar look of disdain. He tossed another stack of papers onto Michael's desk with a thud. "I need you to stay late and finish this," Oscar ordered, his voice laced with condescension. Michael glanced at the stack, exhaustion pulling at him, but he didn't protest. "Sure, I'll get it done," he replied, forcing himself to stay composed despite the exhaustion creeping into his bones. Oscar lingered for a moment, his eyes scanning Michael with an amused, almost pitying look. Then, with a smirk, he let out a laugh that cut deeper than any insult. "You know, Carter," he began, his voice dripping with arrogance, "you just don't have the profile to grow here. I'd seriously think about finding something else, something more, at your level." Michael's hands clenched under the desk as his blood boiled. Every fiber of his being wanted to lash out, to reveal who he was, and bring the whole system crashing down. But instead, he took a deep breath, mastering the calm that surprised even him. "Thanks for the advice," Michael replied, his voice steady, though the fire within him was raging. As Oscar turned and left the room, Michael sat there staring at the pile of work before him. He knew now more than ever that he couldn't just walk away. The system needed to be exposed, and the toxic culture was dismantled piece by piece. And while the road ahead was long and full of challenges, each moment of disrespect only strengthened his resolve. The time for justice would come. As Oscar stormed out, Michael sat there, staring at the report tossed in his direction. The weight of humiliation was almost too much to bear, but he kept his focus. Every insult and every false accusation was fuel for the larger purpose that now consumed him. He was no longer enduring this just for his growth, but for every person who, like David Carter, had been trampled on, overlooked, and dismissed by the system he had unwittingly allowed to fester. That night, when the clock neared midnight, Michael finally packed up and left the office. The once bustling city streets were now eerily quiet as he walked toward his car, the cold air biting at his face. Despite the exhaustion that settled into his bones, Michael's mind was alive with thoughts. The emotional weight he carried was real. Each day in that office was like a fresh wound, but it also made his resolve stronger. This was his company, and it had slipped into a state he couldn't ignore any longer. As he drove home through the dark, empty streets, Michael made a firm decision. He would dig deeper into the corruption, the nepotism, and the discrimination that had taken root within Jones Tech. He would uncover the rotten foundation that allowed people like Oscar and his fellow managers to thrive at the expense of real talent. The time would come for him to rip the mask off, reveal himself, and initiate the sweeping changes his company desperately needed. But for now, he remained David Carter, the lowly intern, invisible in plain sight. Every moment of suffering brought him closer to the day he would reclaim his company and transform it into a beacon of fairness and equality. Michael knew the road ahead would not be easy. It would be filled with more pain, more humiliation, and more sacrifices. But the greater purpose outweighed his pride. He wasn't just changing the way his company operated, he was fighting for every employee who had ever been mistreated, disrespected, or overlooked. The days stretched on, each one feeling heavier than the last. Morning after morning, Michael slipped into his disguise as David Carter, pulling on the same worn-out clothes and preparing himself for another day of degradation. The air inside the towering walls of Jones Tech Innovations felt stifling, especially in the dim, forgotten room where he worked. Tucked away from the light and energy of the main office, Michael experienced firsthand what it meant to be unseen, ignored, and undervalued. Despite the grind, he pressed on. Every moment, every insult was another piece of evidence for the changes he would one day make. But the cruelty only intensified as time passed. Oscar, along with other managers, seemed to take pleasure in finding new ways to belittle him. He had become their scapegoat for any problem that surfaced, whether it was a misplaced document or a slow coffee delivery. It always came back to David. Even for things completely out of his control, like system malfunctions, they found a way to lay the blame at his feet. It was no longer just about the job, it was about breaking him. One afternoon, after a system glitch caused an important report to be sent out with errors, Oscar burst into Michael's small room, his heavy footsteps shaking the floor. "Carter, are you incompetent or just pretending?" Oscar shouted, holding up the faulty report with anger. "This disaster is your fault, isn't it?" Michael looked up, confused, as he hadn't even seen that report before. "I didn't work on this," he responded calmly, though his heart pounded. "There must be some mistake." Oscar's eyes narrowed, and a sarcastic laugh escaped his lips. "Of course, Carter. Always an excuse. I think you're not cut out for this place. Why don't you do us all a favor and quit?" The anger in Michael's chest burned hotter, but he kept his voice steady. "I'd like the chance to explain myself, Oscar, because I didn't have anything to do with this report." Oscar stared at him, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, with a sneer, he flung the report onto Michael's desk. "I don't want your excuses, Carter. Just fix it, now." As the door slammed behind Oscar, Michael exhaled slowly, forcing himself to keep calm. Every fiber of his being screamed to reveal who he truly was, to put Oscar in his place once and for all. But the time wasn't right yet. The moment for revelation was still on the horizon, but it was approaching fast. And when it came, it would be more than just a personal triumph, it would be a reckoning. For now, Michael remained in his disguise, silently gathering the proof he needed to tear down the toxic walls built around his company. Each insult and each humiliating task brought him one step closer to justice. As Michael picked up the report from the floor, he knew any attempt to defend himself would fall on deaf ears. His voice carried no weight in this place, where power belonged to the few who held sway over everything. But instead of letting the injustice break him, he absorbed every slight, every insult, as fuel for what he knew was coming, a reckoning. He was no longer just enduring the humiliation, he was preparing to expose the deeply flawed system. As the days went by, Michael's sharp mind picked up on patterns in the manager's behavior. There were constant secretive gatherings, small huddles where decisions that shaped the company were whispered among themselves, far from the ears of regular employees. The outcomes of these decisions always seemed to favor the same people, the same inner circle. Michael thought back to the cafeteria conversation about the director's son, who had soared through the ranks without merit. His suspicions deepened. He knew he had to go further to uncover the depth of the corruption hiding behind closed doors. One evening, long after the rest of the office had emptied, Michael lingered. The air felt heavier, the quiet of the empty halls unnerving. He understood the risk, but his desire to uncover the truth outweighed the fear of being caught. Oscar's office door was ajar, an invitation that Michael couldn't ignore. He stepped inside, heart pounding, and began rifling through the papers on the desk. Among the clutter, a document caught his attention, an employee promotion list from recent months. His eyes quickly scanned the names, and one leaped out at him: Brandon Mitchell. The name was familiar, not from his work, but from hushed conversations in the halls. Brandon was the son of one of the board members, but what sent a jolt through Michael was seeing that Brandon had gone from intern to senior manager in less than a year. No records of significant accomplishments, and no clear rationale for his rise. It was a blatant leap that defied logic. Michael continued digging, flipping through more papers, until he stumbled upon a series of email exchanges between Oscar and other managers. The subject matter was chilling. The emails discussed strategic decisions not in the best interest of the company, but in maintaining relationships with influential families. One email in particular hit him like a punch to the gut. We need to ensure that our allies are in key positions. If it means sacrificing some less important employees, so be it. That was it. Michael had seen enough. This wasn't just favoritism or the occasional bending of rules, it was a systemic abuse of power, a web of nepotism that had infected the company from the top down. Friends, family, and close associates of the powerful were being placed in high-ranking positions regardless of their skills or contributions, while those who worked hard and earned their way were being pushed aside, ignored, and silenced. The next day, Michael acted as though nothing had changed, but inside, the tension was mounting. He was now fully aware of the depth of the problem, but he needed more. He had to gather undeniable evidence that would not only expose the system but dismantle it. Over the following weeks, he became more attuned to the behaviors of managers and their proteges. He noticed how certain individuals who were barely present at work still managed to receive bonuses and promotions, their positions protected simply because of their connections. One day, in the company parking lot, Michael overheard two managers talking. They spoke in low voices, but their conversation was clear. We've got to keep up appearances, Make sure our people stay in the top spots. It's all about keeping the family in control. Michael's stomach churned. What had once been his vision of a thriving, meritocratic company had become a playground for those with the right last name. The culture of nepotism had infiltrated every corner of Jones Tech, corroding the values that had built the company in the first place. The meritocracy he had championed when he founded the company was gone, replaced by a system that crushed the morale of hardworking, talented employees, relegating them to menial jobs while unqualified proteges sat in seats of power. The more he observed, the clearer the picture became. Those who weren't part of the inner circle and lacked the right connections were systematically pushed aside. Their contributions went unnoticed, their efforts unrewarded, while the chosen few thrived without lifting a finger. It was a system of privilege and entitlement that infected every level of the organization, suffocating true innovation and talent. But Michael wasn't going to let it continue. He was gathering the tools he needed, one piece of evidence at a time, and when the moment came, he would bring the entire structure crumbling down. The constant barrage of humiliations was wearing Michael down. The sarcastic comments, the mocking laughter, and the disdainful looks chipped away at his resolve daily, but they also hardened his determination. Each insult, each condescending remark, only served to fuel his resolve to bring down the corrupt system festering within his own company. He knew that simply gathering documents wouldn't be enough. He needed more than paper evidence. He needed a well-thought-out strategy. One especially grueling afternoon, after another belittling speech from Oscar about how worthless he was, Michael slipped into the bathroom, locked himself in one of the stalls, and let out a shaky breath. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, the disguise that had begun to feel more like a suffocating mask than a shield. His reflection showed a man who was slowly unraveling, but the time wasn't right to reveal himself yet. He couldn't afford to blow his cover now, not when he was so close. Just a little longer, he told himself. He came to a realization: the best way to expose the corruption wasn't to fight it head-on, but to make the perpetrators reveal their sins. These managers and directors were greedy, arrogant, and too comfortable in their belief that they were untouchable. Michael decided to play on that arrogance to get them to unwittingly expose themselves. And so, a new phase of his plan began to take shape. Over the next week, Michael began to subtly approach the proteges of the system. He understood that, despite their privileges, many of them were insecure, eager to please their mentors, and paranoid about losing their positions. Listening carefully to their complaints, he observed them in the cafeteria, paying attention to the gossip that buzzed through the hallways. Slowly but surely, he started piecing things together. Then, during one particularly telling conversation, he finally caught a significant lead. Brandon, the same protege who had been promoted without merit, was venting to a fellow intern over coffee, and Michael was close enough to catch the conversation. "Man, you have no idea what it's like working under Oscar," Brandon muttered, his voice low but frustrated. "He's always giving me these ridiculous tasks. Half the time they don't even make sense, but if I don't do them, I'm out." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Michael casually approached, his heart pounding but his face neutral, like what he asked with careful curiosity, trying not to seem too eager. Brandon sighed, looking over his shoulder before answering. "He makes me sign off on these fake reports. I don't even know what they're about, but he says it's to keep things running smoothly." Michael's pulse quickened. "Fake reports? What do you mean, like stuff that shouldn't be in the company records?" Brandon glanced around again, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Yeah, man, projects that don't exist, expenses that don't make sense. He says it's just to make things look good on paper, but I'm starting to think there's more to it." Michael's mind raced. This was at the first real crack in the wall of corruption. These fake reports were likely covering up embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, or worse. If he could get his hands on them, it wouldn't just be evidence of favoritism, it would expose a financial scandal that could bring the whole rotten system crashing down. But he knew he had to tread carefully. "Have you told anyone about this?" Michael asked, keeping his tone as casual as possible. Brandon shook his head quickly. "Are you kidding? I'm out of here. My family depends on this job, man. I can't risk it." Michael nodded in understanding. "Yeah, I get it. It's tough. But hey, if you ever need to talk, you know where to find me." In the following days, Michael carefully continued gathering more details, piecing together the broader picture. He stayed close to Brandon and the other proteges, listening, observing, and waiting for the right moment. He knew that if he could track down those reports and link them to the unjust promotions, he would have enough to blow the lid off the entire operation. But time was not on his side. Each day the pressure to maintain his disguise grew heavier, and every interaction with Oscar or the other managers felt like a ticking clock counting down to the inevitable. He knew his facade as David Carter, the overlooked intern, wouldn't hold much longer, yet he couldn't afford to rush. The downfall of this corrupt system required meticulous planning. He needed the final pieces of evidence before he could reveal his true identity. As the days turned into weeks, the tension mounted. Michael felt the weight of the task before him, but he also knew that his mission was bigger than himself. He had uncovered a system rotten to its core, one that rewarded nepotism and cronyism while crushing the spirits of those who truly deserved recognition. This was his company, and it was his responsibility to clean it up, even if it meant enduring more humiliation and disdain in the meantime. The moment of reckoning was approaching, but Michael knew he had to remain patient, resilient, and sharp. Every piece of evidence he collected, every whispered conversation he overheard, brought him closer to dismantling the toxic culture that had taken root in his absence. The storm was brewing, and when it finally hit, it would leave no stone unturned. The justice Michael sought wouldn't come quickly or easily, but it was a fire burning deep inside him, driving every step he took. He knew that patience was key, like a predator stalking its prey. He would wait for the right moment, observing every misstep, every corrupt word whispered behind closed doors. And when the time came, he would reveal the rot festering within Jones Tech for the world to see. He would expose the corruption that had infiltrated the company he had built with his own hands. On that cold Monday morning, as snow piled high on the streets of New York City, Michael Jones awoke with a sense of unease that he couldn't shake. The chill of winter seeped into his bones, but it wasn't the cold that weighed on him. It was the exhaustion of living a double life, the constant emotional strain of pretending to be someone else, of allowing himself to be humiliated day after day, was taking a toll. As he stared at himself in the mirror, The reflection that looked back was no longer that of the powerful CEO he once was, but of a man worn thin by his mission. His patience was nearing its breaking point, but Michael knew the climax of his investigation was close. He could feel it. He donned the same tired coat and faded jeans that had become his uniform and set out for another day at Jones Tech. The elevator ride up to the 16th floor felt as long as ever, the crowded space filled with people who barely noticed him, if at all. The disguise of David Carter, the invisible intern, was working too well. When he stepped onto the floor, he immediately sensed something was off. The usual office chatter was subdued, replaced by an electric tension that hung in the air. As Michael walked down the hall, he spotted Oscar pacing back and forth, his face flushed with anger. Something had gone wrong, and Michael felt the weight of the moment. "You, Carter," Oscar barked the moment he saw Michael pass by. "Get in here, now." Michael swallowed his rising unease and stepped into Oscar's office, keeping the submissive demeanor that had become second nature to him. Inside, two other managers sat, their expressions cold and unreadable. The room felt oppressive, thick with tension. Michael knew that this was going to be a confrontation, one that could either make or break his entire plan. "What's going on?" Michael asked, keeping his voice low and nervous, as David would. Oscar slammed a stack of papers onto his desk with a furious glare. "These," he spat, pointing at the documents, "are the reports you were supposed to scan and send to finance last week. Why haven't they been sent? Do you have any idea what kind of mess this has caused?" Michael picked up the papers, his heart racing. These were the very same reports he had scanned and submitted days ago. He remembered the task clearly and knew that he had completed it. But here they were, as if he'd never done a thing. It didn't take long for Michael to realize what was happening. Oscar was setting him up, trying to frame him as incompetent. This was more than just a reprimand. This was an attempt to make him quit. "I scanned them," Oscar, Michael said calmly, despite the tension swirling in the room. Maybe there was an issue with the system. "System error." Oscar's face turned crimson with rage. "You are the error, Carter. I knew from day one you weren't reliable. And now, because of your incompetence, I have to explain this to finance. You think I'm going to let this fall on me?" Michael felt the heat of the accusation, but he remained composed. The other managers, sitting on the sidelines like vultures, said nothing. They just watched, waiting for their moment to pounce, feeding off the tension in the room. This wasn't just about a missing report, it was a calculated move. Oscar wanted to break him and humiliate him into quitting, but Michael was far from ready to give up. He had come too far to back down now. "I understand you're upset," Michael replied, keeping his voice measured, "but I completed the task. Something must have gone wrong after I sent them." Oscar's laughter was sharp and venomous. "You always have an excuse, don't you, Carter? Always passing the blame. Well, let me make one thing clear, you're on thin ice. I won't tolerate this kind of screw-up again. Fix it now, or you're out." Michael met Oscar's eyes, the tension between them palpable. For a brief moment, Michael considered revealing his true identity, putting an end to the charade right then and there. But it wasn't time yet. He still needed more evidence. He still needed to push Oscar and the others to expose themselves further. "Understood," Michael said, his voice steady. Oscar smirked, clearly satisfied with his show of power. "Get out of my office, Carter. And don't let this happen again." Michael turned and left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. His heart was pounding, but he forced himself to remain calm. "They think they have the upper hand," he thought, "but they have no idea who they're dealing with." This confrontation was just one more piece in the puzzle, one more push that would lead to the inevitable fall of those who had corrupted his company. As he walked back to his desk, Michael's resolve only deepened. The justice he sought wasn't far off now. Each humiliation, each accusation brought him closer to the moment when he would expose the truth. And when that moment came, it would be devastating. The system of nepotism, greed, and arrogance that had taken hold of Jones Tech would be torn apart, and those who had thrived on corruption would finally face the consequences of their actions. But for now, Michael would continue to play his part, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When that day arrived, the name Michael Jones would no longer be whispered behind closed doors. It would be spoken with the respect and authority it deserved. "I can try to fix it right now," Michael said, keeping his voice level despite the sting of Oscar's venomous tone. "I'll redo the work, and we can send the files today." Oscar stared at him like he was nothing more than a pest, something to be swatted away. "You're pathetic, Carter, but fine, go ahead. And if this happens again, I'll make sure you're blacklisted in every company in the city." "Got it." Michael gave a small nod, gathering the documents before walking out of the office. The weight of the humiliation sat heavily on his shoulders, but he reminded himself of the bigger picture. Each moment of degradation was another piece in the puzzle, another step closer to the justice he sought. He knew Oscar was starting to feel unsettled, perhaps he didn't know why, but his growing hostility meant he sensed a threat, and that was a good sign. It meant Michael was getting close to exposing the truth. As Michael sat at his desk, redoing the work he had already completed, his mind churned with thoughts about the next steps. He had collected enough evidence to begin unraveling the lies, but Brandon Mitchell's role in the fake report still lingered in the back of his mind. Brandon was a key figure, a loose end that needed to be tied up before Michael could take down the entire corrupt network. It wasn't just about Oscar anymore. It was about dismantling the entire structure of nepotism that allowed these people to thrive while others were left to suffer. That afternoon, an opportunity fell into Michael's lap. As he was leaving work, he spotted Brandon in the parking lot, standing near his car and arguing heatedly into his phone. The frustration in Brandon's voice was clear even from a distance, and Michael couldn't help but linger, carefully listening to fragments of the conversation. "You don't understand," Brandon nearly shouted. "If this goes wrong, I'm screwed. Oscar said everything would be under control, but now it's all falling apart." Michael edged closer, feigning distraction as he pretended to fumble with his keys. He was close enough now to hear more clearly, his heart racing with each word. Brandon hung up abruptly, his face flushed with stress, and as soon as he saw Michael nearby, his expression shifted into a forced smile. "Hey, David," Brandon greeted him, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everything okay?" Michael nodded, sensing the perfect opportunity to pry. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said with a hint of casual concern. "Sounded like you were dealing with something pretty serious. Is everything all right with Oscar?" Brandon hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. For a moment it seemed like he might brush off the question, but then, as if relieved to finally have someone to talk to, he let out a sigh. "It's the same stuff, you know. Oscar's pushing me to get these reports approved, and half the time it feels impossible. I swear the pressure is unreal." Michael gave a sympathetic nod, maintaining his relaxed demeanor. "I can imagine. And these reports, are they really that critical?" Brandon's eyes flickered with tension, but before he could respond, Oscar appeared at the building's entrance, his voice booming across the parking lot. "Mitchell, get over here, we need to go over tomorrow's presentation. Now." He didn't spare a glance for Michael, but he pointed in his direction anyway. "And you make sure that work is finished." Michael met Oscar's gaze calmly, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It's done." Oscar grunted in response and disappeared back into the building, dragging Brandon along with him. But Michael knew something important now. Brandon was feeling the heat, and so was Oscar. The cracks in their facade were beginning to show. The reports, whatever they were more than just paperwork. They were the key to unlocking the corruption, and Brandon's slip in the parking lot had given Michael the confirmation he needed. Walking to his car, Michael's mind was already spinning with how to use this new information. He had to be careful and methodical. Oscar and the others were powerful, and they would close ranks if they sensed a bigger threat. But Michael had no intention of making his move too soon, not yet. The pieces were falling into place, and soon he would have everything he needed. For now, he remained in the shadows, still David Carter, the invisible intern. But soon, when the time was right, he would step into the light, and the system that had held so many people down for so long would collapse, starting with Oscar and the managers who thought they were untouchable. The clock was ticking, and Michael was ready to strike. Oscar gave a slight nod in agreement, but before turning his attention to Brandon, he sent a look toward Michael that carried more weight than any spoken words. It wasn't just a glance, it was a dagger-sharp look filled with disdain, a flicker of contempt mixed with something else. Suspicion. Oscar had once regarded Michael as a mere pawn, a submissive and unassuming presence within the company, someone easy to manipulate and control. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 4 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. But now, in that brief moment, Oscar began to see through the facade. Something was unsettling about him, something that hadn't been apparent before. The man he thought he knew, David Carter, was not the naive fool he had pegged him to be. And underneath it all, Oscar could sense an unseen layer, something that eluded him but gnawed at his mind, a danger he couldn't yet identify. The days following that moment were a whirlwind of tension, and Michael's resolve only deepened. He knew Oscar was on the edge, standing precariously close to a fall. Yet Michael also knew that suspicions alone wouldn't be enough to bring him down. He needed solid proof, something that would leave no room for doubt. Brandon, on the other hand, appeared to be spiraling. The normally confident young man was now a bundle of nerves, his hands trembling, his eyes darting around, as if he expected someone to be watching his every move. It was clear he could feel the noose tightening around him, even if he didn't fully understand why. It was as if an invisible weight pressed down on him, growing heavier by the day. And then it happened. On a bitterly cold Friday morning, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Michael had become adept at moving through the vast halls of Jones Tech without drawing attention. He had honed the art of invisibility, slipping into meetings unnoticed, overhearing whispered conversations without ever being seen. And it was during one of these clandestine strolls through the company's corridors that he found himself outside a meeting room, the voices inside muffled but just loud enough to catch his attention. He paused, pressing his ear to the door, and what he overheard sent a chill down his spine. Inside, Oscar was in a hushed but urgent conversation with another manager. His tone was low and deliberate, but there was no mistaking the weight of his words. "We need those numbers to match," Oscar said, his voice steady but laced with tension. "If the board catches wind that we've been diverting funds, we're done. Everything we've built will come crashing down. You know what's at stake here." The other manager, visibly nervous from what Michael could gather, swallowed hard. There was a slight tremble in his response. "I understand, but Brandon is starting to crack under the pressure. He thinks someone is onto him, that he's being watched." Oscar let out a frustrated sigh, his exasperation barely contained. "Then keep him in line," he growled. "He's weak, but he's still useful. We've come too far to let him blow everything up now. If he goes down, we all go down. Make sure he knows that." Michael felt a surge of triumph as he stood there, listening. This was it. The missing piece. For weeks, he had been circling the truth, gathering snippets of information, piecing together the shady dealings happening right under the noses of the company's board. But now he had direct evidence that tied Oscar and other senior managers to the embezzlement of company funds. They had been siphoning money, falsifying reports, and using their influence to grant themselves and their closest allies undeserved promotions and hefty bonuses. And Brandon, the vulnerable and impressionable young protege, was at the heart of their scheme. He was the key, the one who could bring the entire operation crashing down. That afternoon, Michael made a decision that would alter the course of everything. The time for secrecy was over. He had gathered enough evidence to expose the entire operation, and if he waited any longer, he risked losing his chance. Oscar and his co-conspirators were smart, and it wouldn't take long for them to catch wind that someone was onto them. If they found out it was Michael, they would destroy the evidence and potentially him without hesitation. There was no room for error now. By Monday morning, the atmosphere at Jones Tech was electric with tension. The entire company had been called into an emergency meeting with the CEO, sending rumors swirling through the halls. Whispers filled the air, employees speculating about what could be so urgent. Some believed it was a major announcement, perhaps a merger or a groundbreaking new project. Others feared the worst: layoffs, a restructuring of the company, or a massive shakeup at the executive level. But no one, not even the most senior managers, had any idea what was about to unfold. Michael arrived at the office early, his heart pounding in his chest. He wore the same disguise he had adopted for weeks: David Carter, the quiet, diligent employee who stayed in the background, unnoticed and unimportant. But today he knew it would be for the last time. Entering the building through the side entrance, he navigated through the crowded lobby with practiced ease, taking the elevator up to the executive floor. As the doors opened and he stepped into the grand conference room, a wave of emotion hit him like a freight train. Weeks of living in the shadows, of playing a role, of watching and waiting, every frustration, every moment of doubt came rushing back. But there was something else now, too. Fierce adrenaline surged through his veins. Today the tables would turn. Today he would finally bring Oscar and his accomplices to justice. The room slowly filled with people. Oscar walked in with his usual air of authority, his sharp eyes scanning the room, as if he were already looking for an enemy to confront. Brandon trailed behind him, pale and jittery, the stress taking its toll. Other members of the company's upper management followed suit, each one carrying the same expression of confusion and unease. The whispers grew louder as more employees filed in, the sense of anticipation hanging heavy in the air. At precisely 9 a.m., the room fell silent. The tension was palpable, a thick, suffocating cloud that pressed down on everyone present. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle onto his shoulders. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. He rose from his seat, the eyes of every person in the room turning toward him, curiosity and confusion flickering across their faces. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice calm but carrying an unexpected authority that instantly silenced the room. There was a stillness, a collective breath held as everyone waited for what would come next. "Before we proceed, I'd like to properly introduce myself." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Faces around the room shifted from confusion to realization as the weight of his presence and his true identity began to sink in. The truth was about to unravel in front of their eyes, and the reckoning had only just begun. Oscar's face twisted into a deep frown, but he stayed quiet, his eyes locked on Michael. The confusion was palpable, Oscar's mind racing to piece together what was happening. Meanwhile, Brandon sat beside him, visibly relieved, as if thinking Michael's bold move meant the storm would pass him by. He likely assumed David Carter, the timid intern, was about to take the blame for whatever trouble was brewing. But as Michael began to remove his glasses, standing taller and straighter than ever before, Brandon's relief quickly morphed into wide-eyed panic. "I am Michael Jones," he declared, his voice firm and unwavering, as he placed his simple framed glasses on the table. His posture, once that of an unassuming employee, now exuded undeniable authority. "I am the CEO of this company." The room erupted into shocked murmurs, disbelief spreading like wildfire. The faces of the senior managers, once filled with smug confidence, turned ghostly pale. The realization of what had just unfolded hit them like a tidal wave, stripping away the arrogance they had clung to for so long. Oscar, who had been frozen in stunned silence, shot up from his seat, his expression a volatile mixture of fury and fear. "This is some kind of sick joke, right?" he shouted, his voice tinged with desperation as he tried to grasp at control. "You seriously expect us to believe that the CEO of this company would lower himself to play an intern?" Michael's expression remained unflinching, calm, and composed. "It's no joke, Oscar. For the past few weeks, I've been working undercover, posing as a new intern to observe how my company, a company I built from the ground up on principles of fairness and integrity, was being run behind closed doors." The silence that followed was suffocating. The weight of Michael's words pressed down on everyone in the room like an anchor, especially on Oscar, whose bluster was beginning to falter. He looked as though the floor had dropped out beneath him, but he wasn't ready to give up. "Not yet." "This is absurd," Oscar blurted, the panic now seeping into his voice. "We haven't done anything wrong. You have no idea what you're talking about." But Michael wasn't done. Calmly, methodically, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents, the damning evidence he had been gathering as David G. He laid them on the table in front of him with deliberate precision. "These are the falsified reports you created," Oscar, Michael said, his voice steady but filled with quiet authority. "They justify the embezzlement you orchestrated and the unearned promotions you and your co-conspirators handed out to line your pockets. I have detailed emails, transcripts of your meetings, and testimonies from witnesses that prove everything: your manipulation, the nepotism, the lies. You built a corrupt system that rewards only those within your inner circle, while the hard-working and deserving employees of this company have been neglected and abused." Brandon, who had been sitting in stunned silence, visibly slumped in his chair. His face had drained of all color, his hands trembling as the enormity of the situation dawned on him. He had played a role in this, and there was no escaping the consequences now. The walls were closing in, just as he had feared. Oscar, now desperate, stepped toward Michael, his voice cracking with anxiety. "Michael, listen to me," he pleaded. "This can't happen. We can fix this. Let me explain." But Michael raised a hand, silencing him with a cold, determined gaze. "There's nothing left to explain, Oscar. You betrayed the trust I placed in you when I handed you the reins to help run this company. Instead of upholding the values I founded this business on, you turned it into a playground for your greed, harming those who worked tirelessly in good faith." He turned his piercing gaze to the other managers seated around the table, each of them now visibly trembling under the weight of impending doom. "As for the rest of you, every single person involved in this scheme will face the consequences of their actions. There will be terminations, legal investigations, and whatever else it takes to ensure that Jones Tech becomes what it was always meant to be: a place of meritocracy, where people are judged by their contributions and integrity, not their connections or willingness to play dirty." The room was deathly silent. The managers who had once been so confident sat in stunned disbelief, their futures now uncertain and bleak. Brandon, barely holding himself together, sat on the edge of his seat, his eyes glossy with tears. Michael turned to him, his voice steady but firm. "Brandon, I know you were used by Oscar and the others, but that doesn't absolve you of responsibility. You chose to participate in this scheme, and you will have to answer for that." Brandon nodded slowly, his head hanging low in shame. There was nothing more he could say. His career, his reputation, everything was crumbling before him, and all he could do was sit there and watch as it unraveled. Michael took a few steps forward, his eyes sweeping the room as he spoke, his voice strong and filled with conviction. "From this day forward, Jones Tech will be rebuilt. We will return to the values that this company was founded on: integrity, fairness, and respect for every employee. If any of you think you can escape the consequences of your actions, think again. I have more than enough evidence to ensure that everyone knows exactly what you've done." He paused, letting the gravity of his words settle in the room, watching as the managers exchanged panicked glances. They knew there was no escape, no second chances. Their fate was sealed. "And it starts now," Michael said, his voice final, leaving no room for doubt. With that, he turned on his heel and left the room, his footsteps echoing through the hall as the stunned silence continued behind him. He knew the storm was about to hit, that the fallout from what he had just done would be massive. There would be investigations, firings, lawsuits, and a slew of challenges in the days and weeks to come. But Michael had never felt more ready to face it all. As he walked away from the conference room, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had done what needed to be done. The corrupt system that had festered under Oscar's leadership would be torn down brick by brick, and in its place, Michael would rebuild Jones Tech stronger, fairer, and more just than it had ever been before. The road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles, but he knew he had made the right choice. He had restored the integrity of his company, and in doing so, he had proven that no matter how deeply corruption ran, the truth would always rise to the surface. And with that truth, he would shape a brighter, more honest future for everyone at Jones Tech. Michael stood at the center of the stage, the weight of recent events still heavy in the air. The silence in the auditorium was profound, filled with anticipation and unease. The employees who had gathered, those not involved in the corruption but still deeply affected by the fallout, waited for his words. They had spent the past few hours watching their superiors being marched into conference rooms and then leaving with grim faces. The uncertainty of their futures hung over them like a cloud. Michael looked out at the sea of faces, some hopeful, others anxious. These were the people who had kept the company afloat while the rot of corruption had festered at the top. He owed them the truth, and more than that, he owed them reassurance. Taking a deep breath, he began. "I know that many of you are feeling uncertain, possibly even afraid of what comes next. And I understand why. Over the last few hours, the truth about what's been happening behind closed doors has finally come to light. Senior managers and executives, people you trusted to lead, have been found guilty of betraying not only this company but all of you." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Michael raised a hand and silence quickly returned. "I founded Jones Tech Innovations with the belief that success should be built on a foundation of fairness, integrity, and hard work. Unfortunately, those principles were undermined by a few who sought to enrich themselves at the expense of this company and its people. But let me be clear, that ends today." The tension in the room seemed to lessen, but only slightly. People were still waiting, still unsure of what was to come. "As of this morning," Michael continued, "those responsible for the corruption, Oscar, Brandon, and the other managers involved in the nepotism and embezzlement schemes have been removed from their positions. Legal actions are being taken, and they will face the full consequences of their actions. But this company is not going to be defined by their mistakes. Instead, it will be defined by how we move forward." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 5 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. A wave of relief washed over the room, but there was still uncertainty in the air. Michael could sense it. He knew these people needed more than just promises. They needed a new direction, something tangible to believe in. "I want you all to understand that my return wasn't just about cleaning the house," Michael said, his voice growing stronger. "It's about rebuilding this company into something even better than it was before. Jones Tech was founded on innovation, creativity, and community, and we are going to return to those values. But this time we will be even more vigilant in protecting the principles that should guide us. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. Going forward, there will be major changes. I will personally oversee the restructuring of our leadership, and we will be implementing new checks and balances to ensure transparency at every level. No one, no matter their position, will be above the law or above ethical behavior. We will be instituting new policies to prevent the kind of corruption that has plagued us, and we will be working closely with external auditors to maintain accountability. A few nods of approval came from the crowd, and Michael could see the flicker of hope growing. But beyond just policy changes, he continued, I want to make it clear that this company belongs to all of you. The hard work, the late nights, and the dedication you've all shown, that is what makes Jones Tech strong. And it's those qualities that we're going to build on as we move forward together. Michael stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his tone becoming more personal, more direct. I know that many of you may be feeling disillusioned right now. You've seen the worst side of corporate greed, and some of you may have lost faith in this company. But I want to offer you a challenge to not just survive this, but to thrive. I need every one of you to step up, to bring your best ideas and your hardest work to the table. We're not just going to fix what's broken, we're going to rebuild something greater, something that reflects the best of who we are. The energy in the room shifted. Where there had been apprehension, there was now a growing sense of optimism. Michael's vision was bold, but it was exactly what they needed to hear. Effective immediately, he announced, I'm forming a task force made up of employees from all departments, people who understand the heart of this company, not just its numbers. You will have a direct line to me, and together we will chart a new path forward. Promotions will no longer be based on favoritism or connections. They will be earned through merit, skill, and dedication. You are the future of this company, and I'm putting that future in your hands. As Michael finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't just polite acknowledgement, it was genuine, heartfelt approval. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, the employees of Jones Tech felt a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just witnessing the collapse of a corrupt system, they were part of its rebirth. Michael stepped back, letting the applause wash over him. He knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but for the first time in a while, he felt hopeful. He had exposed the corruption, and now, with the help of those who had always believed in the company's mission, he could rebuild it from the ground up. As the applause died down, Michael gave one last message. We've been through dark times, but together we'll make sure Jones Tech Innovations becomes a place we can all be proud of again. Let's show the world what we're capable of. With that, Michael left the stage, knowing that the hard work was only just beginning, but confident that this time he wasn't doing it alone. Michael looked up from his desk, offering Claire a warm smile as she stepped hesitantly into his office. Her expression was one of quiet gratitude, and her words carried a weight that resonated deeply with him. Claire, you don't need to thank me, he said, his voice gentle but firm. What's happening now is long overdue, and it's what should have been in place from the beginning. You deserve to be in a place where your work is recognized and appreciated. Claire nodded, but she seemed to hesitate as if there was more she wanted to say. Michael gestured for her to sit down, sensing that this conversation went beyond mere gratitude. She took a seat, and after a brief pause, she spoke again, her tone more vulnerable. For a long time, I felt invisible here, she admitted. No matter how hard I worked or how many ideas I contributed, it felt like it didn't matter because I wasn't part of the inner circle. I saw people who didn't deserve it getting promotions and taking credit for work they hadn't done. It was demoralizing. Michael's chest tightened at her words. He had known the corruption ran deep, but hearing firsthand how it had impacted someone like Claire, the very people who had helped keep the company afloat, made it all the more real. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Michael said sincerely. I built this company with the hope that everyone would have a fair chance to thrive, and I failed to stop the rot before it took hold. But I promise you, things are different now, and I'm here to make sure they stay that way. Claire smiled, a flicker of hope lighting her face. I believe you, Mr. Jones. I can already feel the changes. People are excited to come to work again. There's a sense of possibility in the air, like maybe things really can get better. Michael leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers with determination. Things will get better, Claire. We're not just cleaning up a mess, we're building something new, something that reflects the best of who we are. And that's only possible because of people like you, who kept working hard even when things were tough. Claire's smile grew, and the tension in her posture seemed to ease. Thank you, she said softly. I won't let you down. You never have, Michael replied with a nod. As Claire stood to leave, Michael watched her go, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Claire's story was just one of many, but it represented everything he was fighting for: an environment where every employee, regardless of their position or background, felt valued and respected. He had taken the first steps toward that vision, but he knew there was still much to be done. The weeks that followed were marked by rapid progress. Michael worked closely with the new ethics committee, ensuring that transparency became a core value of the company. Weekly meetings were held to review the company's direction, and employees from every level were encouraged to voice their concerns and ideas. The mentorship program blossomed, with seasoned employees guiding newer hires, fostering an atmosphere of growth and mutual respect. The career development initiatives gave employees the chance to advance based on merit, not favoritism. And most importantly, the company culture began to shift from one of competition and fear to one of collaboration and shared success. As these changes took root, the impact became undeniable. Innovation surged, with teams producing new ideas and projects at a pace the company hadn't seen in years. Jones Tech Innovations was no longer just a name; it became a symbol of resilience, transformation, and integrity. One day, Michael received an email from a former employee who had left during the height of the corruption. The email read, "To Mr. Jones, I just wanted to say that I've been watching the changes you've made at Jones Tech, and I have to admit, I'm impressed. It's rare to see a company bounce back the way yours has. I left because I didn't see a future here, but now I'm reconsidering that choice. If there's ever a chance for me to come back, I'd love to be part of this new era." Michael smiled as he read the message. It was just one of many he had received recently, but each one reminded him of how far they had come and how much further they could go. By the end of the year, Jones Tech had not only recovered but had also grown stronger than ever. The company's reputation, once tarnished by scandal, had been restored, and its renewed focus on ethics and meritocracy earned them respect across the industry. Other companies looked to Jones Tech as an example of how to turn adversity into opportunity, and new partnerships began to form as a result. One evening, as Michael stood by the large windows in his office, gazing out at the city lights, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He had faced down corruption, rebuilt trust, and restored hope where there had once been disillusionment. But more than that, he had fulfilled his promise to himself and his employees to make Jones Tech a place they could all be proud of. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 6 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Claire again, this time with a new idea for a project she'd been working on. Michael smiled, welcoming her in. As they discussed her plans, Michael couldn't help but feel grateful, not just for the progress they had made, but for the people who had made it possible. Together, they were building something new, something that would stand the test of time. And as long as they continued to work together, the future of Jones Tech looked brighter than ever. Michael stood by the window, taking in the shifting landscape outside. The melting snow, giving way to the first hints of spring, mirrored the transformation happening within Jones Tech, a company once mired in corruption, now blossoming with new hope and purpose. As he watched the bustling city below, Michael couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of pride, not just for what had been accomplished, but for the journey that lay ahead. He had walked through the fire, confronting betrayal, greed, and dishonesty head-on, and emerged stronger, not just as a leader, but as a person. It wasn't just about restoring his company's integrity, it was about ensuring that the people who made Jones Tech what it was, people like Claire, finally had the opportunity to thrive in a fair, supportive environment. Moments like his conversation with Claire reaffirmed why all the sleepless nights, the tough decisions, and the relentless pursuit of justice had been worth it. Jones Tech was more than just a tech company now, it was a community where every voice mattered, where contributions were recognized, and where the future was shaped by the principles he had always believed in. As Michael stood there, he reflected on how far they had come. The task ahead was still immense: rebuilding trust, fostering innovation, and creating a workplace where respect, merit, and diversity were at the forefront. But for the first time in a long while, Michael felt at peace. He had cleaned the house, rid it of the toxic culture that had once dominated its corridors, and now the foundation was solid once again. The uncertainty that had clouded his thoughts in recent months finally dissolved. He was sure of one thing: Jones Tech would thrive, not just because of cutting-edge technology, but because of the people at its heart, the employees who had remained loyal through the darkest times. And those who would join the new era bringing with them fresh ideas and a renewed sense of purpose. Michael smiled as he turned away from the window. He knew the journey was far from over, but this was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with true innovation, not only in the products they developed, but in how the company itself would evolve. Integrity, respect, and justice were no longer just words. They were the pillars on which Jones Tech would continue to rise. With a deep breath, Michael walked back to his desk, feeling lighter and more determined than ever. The past was behind them and the future, with all its challenges and opportunities, was ahead. He was ready. They all were. Together, they would redefine what success looked like, not just in business, but in how they treated each other and in the legacy they would leave for generations to come. As we close this powerful journey of transformation within Jones Tech, I hope Michael's story has left a lasting impact on you. The challenges he faced and the decisions he made remind us all of the importance of integrity, fairness, and resilience in both business and life. Now, I'd like to hear from you. What have you learned from this story? What's one key lesson that stood out to you? And how will you bring it into practice in your own life? Please share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with others, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss out on more inspiring stories and valuable insights. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.